There we go. Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
Hey, we can't even do small talk today. We're about ready to invade Iran. The U.S. Supreme Court just overruled Trump on tariffs. Something else. Oh, the Epstein files continue. There's just all sorts to talk about. We don't have time today to talk about current events. Are you bummed?
Whatever. The current
Yeah,
events, the stream keeps right on rolling.
yeah, it does. In fact, I just posted all three of those events on a post of June that I talked about tariffs, Iran, and immigration. Well, it seems like these issues never change. We just keep arguing. I bet we'll get to that. Okay, so we've got a premier. Premier seems odd. We've got a prestigious. We got a friend. He's been around a long time in Colorado. We've got a friend who's one of the most accomplished business people in the United States. I'm not saying you're a one percenter, Alex. There's a lot of accomplished business people in the United States, but there's no doubt your resume is extraordinary. You have, I think, 2 degrees or 3 degrees, at least a master's degree, like in engineering or is it mining? I don't know. Your resume is really impressive. And you're an accomplished business person, not only here in the nation, but in like at least 6 countries around the world. We're honored to have you back. You're one of the few people we've ever had back, besides like a 7-time historic author, Professor Stephen Knott, who's really worth having back. You're the first person we've ever had back. So hooray. Alex
Wow.
Cranberg, welcome back. Okay, Professor, before we end Alex, um, I think it's important to just pause everything. I just shouted out a bunch of stuff, but we shout out too much stuff as citizens. It's obnoxious. And it seems like we should kind of get down to core values, some basics. And so, Professor, I'd like to steal a page from you and say that we really need to talk about principles before we talk about anything else, and see if we can find some common ground on principles. You think, because Alex, we talked about you behind your back 2 weeks ago, you think you and Alex agree on most things. I think you disagree. So this is going to be a really exciting conversation for me. Will you start us out, Professor? And then, Alex, you're going to give your own answer, and we're going to see if we cooperate or collide. What are the principles of the United States, Professor? What do we stand for? What does it mean to be an American?
Well, I guess you start with the principle that the United States is an ideological nation state created in order to secure rights, uh, founded in the Enlightenment principles and enacted by the Constitution of the United States. And the bedrock principles are outlined in the Declaration, and the purpose of the Constitution is to enact um, the values enshrined in the Declaration.
Okay, so you're not giving just a book answer as an academic. You have 3 degrees. You have a PhD in U.S. history. This is something you live your life by, right? These are like core foundational.
Yep.
Okay,
It's what I teach when I roll out of bed in the morning, and the places that I associate myself with, places like the Ashbrook Center and the Teaching American History Project and Constituting America and the Bill of Rights Institute, they're all dedicated to to enacting the ideals of the Declaration via the Constitution.
and you don't need any notes. You can talk about this for hours, inside and out, left and right. You are a subject matter expert.
I don't know about that. Everybody can use notes, especially as
Well,
I
sure,
get older. I need
sure,
coffee. I need notes.
yeah, sure.
I
Okay,
need
so
books. I need reminders. Yeah.
I'm with you. So I'm setting you up as like one of the experts, similar to how Alex is an expert in his businesses. I mean, he truly is an expert. So, Alex, you are not a PhD in history. You're a business guy. You solve problems. You create wealth. You make sure we heat our homes in the winter, cool our homes in the summer, places to get here. You have a really important occupation, but you're not a U.S. history professor. So, if your answer is completely different, I would expect that. What does it mean to be an American? What are the foundational principles of America? Alex Cranberg, welcome.
Well, thank you. First of all, I could have a completely different answer than Stephen and still have a degree, and several degrees in history and political philosophy. As he well knows, there's a lot of divergent paths of thought as to what constitutes the bedrock principles.
I knew we
for
disagree. I
America.
disagree with that, by the way, Alex. I don't think that's true. But anyway, I shouldn't have interrupted. I truly do not think that's true. I guess I'm a foundational. I'm a, what is that in religious terms? I'm a zealot. I'm a evangelical bedrock Christian. I'm a
But so what? I don't. We don't want to get off on a tangent here, but you're suggesting that nobody with a PhD in political philosophy disagrees with Professor Tootle on this question?
yes, that he has the right answer. He knows what it means to
No,
be
no,
an
you're
American.
saying he has the right answer. I'm saying there's other people with PhDs. If we're just going to tote up, who's got more degrees, I don't think that's really what you're trying to suggest. I'm suggesting that
Agreed.
there are
Agreed.
other
The degree doesn't
highly
matter, but
credible, well-educated,
yeah,
alternative points of view.
Yeah,
Um,
and I disavow what John Brackney just said.
fair enough. Keep going, Alex. The floor is yours for now. What does it mean to be an American?
so I think when I think about America, of course, the Declaration and the Constitution are two very important parts of expressions of that. Personally, I think that we have more to be grateful to for the Constitution than the Declaration of Independence. What the Constitution did was create a separation of powers that balanced the various branches of government against each other, such that nobody, and today's a great illustration of that, no branch of power is really able to take off and take the passions of the day too far. And that could easily happen from any one of the parties. We can see our great virtue is, I think, our ability to be able to prevent excessive concentration of powers. And that's all expressed really in the Constitution and not particularly in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is more of a uh, um, of an aspirational document. It's not a practical document. And I think that the pursuit of happiness is something that can be expressed as an aspirational item by virtually many governments who have unfortunately fallen to the wayside because they've not been able to control excessive power in one or another branches of government, particularly the executive branch. I think when I think about America, I don't think it's completely an idea country, because the uh, there are wonderful ideas that have been expressed as found in foundational documents by many countries throughout history. But the ability to be able to actually pursue that on a consistent basis over hundreds of years, is what makes America unique. I think when I think about where did the Declaration of Independence, where do these ideas come from? I mean, obviously, the Enlightenment has a certain amount to do with it, but why did we become America instead of becoming like France and which ran on some of the same basic ideas, but went in a completely different direction, and ended up with Napoleon after the terror. So I I think that part of the reason America is different is because we have a history that goes back well before the Enlightenment, a history of political philosophy. It goes back to the Magna Carta, it goes back to common law, and it goes back to the four cultures that came from England, and have expressed themselves in different parts of the United States and expressed themselves differently, but with a common theme. And whether or not we realize the importance of Anglo-Protestant political philosophy and the formation of our own national character, it's extremely important part of America. It's not expressed in a document, but it's part of our culture. And I think the biggest part that people want to sometimes have a problem with when they're trying to express America is they don't want to say, well, we're Anglo-Protestants, because we're not, of course. We have an incredible diverse array of nationalities which have come into America, but they've assimilated into an Americanness that we don't see anywhere else in the world. And it's a cultural assimilation and a certain type of people that have come here for opportunity. And fortunately for America, the Anglo-Protestant attitude as it's expressed itself with the kind of balance of powers that we have in America, a very important part of that has been tolerance. So we do have Germans and Chinese and other people come into America, and we don't make them be exactly like us. It's not like Hungary, which doesn't like immigration because everybody needs to be Hungarian. But we do assimilate into a national character. And I don't think that we can describe what America is without talking about who we are as a people and what are the folkways of America.
Okay, Alex, I really appreciate your answer. And I don't know if you believe me on this, but I would have been able to give that exact same answer 5 years ago. That would be I have a political science degree, I have a law degree, I've been working in public policy and politics government for 40 years. And that would have been my answer 5 years ago. 10 years ago, I met, well, about 12 or 13 years ago now, I met Professor Tootle at the first inaugural course of the American Enterprise Institute Leadership Network. We both went out to DC for 3 days and learned about Gettysburg and learned about public policy. I met Arthur Brooks and Jonah Goldberg and a bunch of really smart people at AEI. And then 5 years ago, Professor Tootle and I decided to start founding this podcast to help a civic conversation across America about history and public policy. Professor Tootle has totally changed my speech or your speech because of his background in philosophy. And I think it's really interesting. I am now a follower of Professor Tootle. So Professor Tootle, the next 5 or 10 minutes is yours.
I want to pump the brakes on that.
Yeah, I know. It's a
Yeah.
little melodramatic. But your thoughts on the Declaration and the Constitution really changed my perspective of the first 53 years of my life. So, Professor Tootle, I saw you taking notes. I'd like you two to converse for the next 5 or 10 or 15 minutes without me even interjecting. Just back and forth. The show is yours, gentlemen.
And this is why I said, that we agree on most things. As I was taking notes, there wasn't anything that Alex said that I necessarily took that much umbrage with, that where we should be grateful for many things. I agree with that, that we should be particularly grateful for the separation of powers. Yes. The only thing I looked slightly askance at is when you said we're not completely an idea country. I would agree we're not completely an idea country. We didn't fall from outer space with these documents. That there's an interaction between culture that I've frankly have spent most of my life emphasizing, precisely because I've said many times in many talks, quoting the movie Club Paradise, where Robin Williams says, "Well, they all have constitutions. It's just theirs are written in pencil." That that's a great and insightful joke. That there are a lot of places on earth that have laws, they just don't enforce them. You can't just have the document themselves. You also have to have the culture that says that breathes life into these documents, the values that. And then I started to disagree, I think, with what you were saying about England and France, but then you've kept talking, and I thought, okay. But at the same time, I've always said that one of the underappreciated things about the 150 years of colonial America was that that it lasted for 150 years, and that means that these democratic institutions were developing over a long period of time. And then second, I'll even quote my old advisor Alonzo Hamby, one of the jokes he would tell, which is that if this historian named John Patrick Diggins was making a comic strip about the American founding, he would have called it Calvin and Locke. And I've always felt like the Calvinism is underappreciated. That understanding the interaction between those particular religious beliefs were really important in terms of cementing the idea of individual liberty, and understanding that there's no certainty of clerical hierarchy to assure salvation, and that means that everyone must perform their duties as individuals. I've always felt like that was an important point to make. And I've also made the point many times about the need for cultural assimilation. And just yesterday in my class, I explained to a class of 60 people how we don't, the importance of tolerance as opposed to celebration. That what needs to be taught and understood about the founding is the importance of not, what do you celebrate, but what do you tolerate in terms of uh, protecting the rights of people who you do not like. That is something that must be taught in every generation because you don't have to teach someone to protect the rights of people who are just like them. You have to teach them the value of tolerance and equality. But if that was as far as Alex Cranberg went, I would say I agree with everything Alex Cranberg says. And when we first talked, I don't remember if it was a couple years ago, but I looked at the agenda.
We ended up agreeing on too many things for it to be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm
But
going to try to throw some spice into it if you guys do it to me again today.
here's the thing. Like he pointed me to this website that said, "Oh, this is what the nationalist conservative movement, sort of stands for." And I forget there were like 11 principles, and I was fine with, 7 or 9 of them. But it's those last two that, which is where I part ways with maybe not Alex, but many members of what can be called the nationalist conservative movement.
And what
Well,
were those couple?
Pardon?
And what were those couple of principles?
Well,
You
the
could read.
first is that I'm an American patriot, meaning that
Mhm.
I believe in the, like I said, enacting the ideals of the Declaration via the Constitution of the United States. And I disagree with the nationalist conservative movement when they would like to destroy the United States and replace it with a Catholic integralist government that is
That I don't that is absolutely a fringe element of national conservatism.
okay.
Obviously, any of these movements have a variety of different threads, but the Catholic integralists are a tiny minority,
Yeah. Um, and
and
uh,
I would not fall into that category.
and again, right, and I wouldn't want to paint you with that brush, but if you're pointing to people like Sara Bomari or Michael Anton, um, there are a lot of people who I would call reactionaries and not conservatives, in that they would
Well,
like to.
perhaps rather than describing a personality, of course, people
Yeah, so
express
let me just
different
say the
principles.
principle. Yeah, the principle
Yeah,
that I disagree with is the idea that we need to destroy institutions or become what we hate in order to counter it. You know,
yeah. Could you explain what that means? Because my understanding of national conservatism is this all about protecting institutions and preserving institutions, as opposed to with the belief that what has been developed over many generations is something that should have a prima facie case for existence and should be modified and improved, but protected.
sure.
So perhaps
And
you could
if
explain which institutions you think national conservatives would wish to destroy.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real life example that I experienced, and then something recent in the headlines. So, for instance, when we were trying to hire a new history professor a few years ago, um, there were people on my faculty who, if anyone espoused a belief in equality, they immediately discounted that person. They would score them as a zero and say, we can't hire them because we have to only hire people who say that they will discriminate on the basis of race. And they were doing it from a leftist point of view. And my solution to that would be that we should, if we do need to make a law about this, we should make a law making it illegal to discriminate against people who believe in equality. However, there are other people out there, maybe my nationalist conservative friends, who would say, no, 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 we need to pass a law that says that you must espouse a certain political belief system in order to be hired. Whereas what I would want would be the thing that is value neutral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't really understand that, because mostly it's been conservatives who've been concerned about being canceled. And
Yeah,
I think that probably, yeah, there is certainly an internal dispute about how far government should go in trying to um, uh, counter institutions which have gone far left to try
right.
to kind of bring them back to the center. And there's O'Sullivan's principle of higher education, which says anything that's not explicitly conservative inevitably becomes leftist. I'm not sure I agree with that, but it certainly is the way things operated in practice. And when you have the trouble I have, and as a former regent of a university grappled with this, if you have an institution where 99% of the professors are you know, are one party, and the dominant ideology, especially in the humanities, is maybe less so in petroleum engineering, for example. But um, if you don't have a good balance, then you end up with and the reality is something that's more propagandistic almost. Um, then you say, okay, we're going to go value neutral on all this. Well, you can't change the status quo from what it was, so it continues to be 99% leftist. So then you're stuck with this question of how do you deal with trying to bring diverse points of view so you can truly have a level playing field ideologically without trying to put the thumb back on the scale the other direction. I don't have a good answer for that, but that's where that debate comes from.
Sure, and I get that, and that appears across all um, what we might call elite institutions, which is how do you how do you counter something that has been so thoroughly overtaken? How do you turn around these giant institutions that are completely infested with people who really despise the United States of America? And I just want to make sure that my solution isn't to put other people in place who despise America. That we can't say, well, you're bad because you hate America. And so many nationalist conservatives take it to the next step, which is to say either we need to destroy the institution or we need to do exactly what they did. And I
So,
would just simply say, I find that counterproductive to become
gentlemen,
something that I despise.
I want to make sure we don't talk too much about personality because that would be a whole year's worth of conversation that I don't even enjoy a minute of it. So I don't want to talk about the personality of President Trump. But it is epitomized, what you're talking about is epitomized by why the president got reelected. Whatever he stands for, and he does stand for some stuff. To me, it's convoluted, but he does stand for some stuff. And he's just breaking everything. And some people love that, and other people abhor it. But what I don't want to talk about is the personality. Professor, I want to ask you this because it may focus our energies for a second. We have about 20 minutes before we go to Q&A. Professor, you have outlined all the things about the Declaration and the Constitution and character and said President Trump has none of them. He's un-American. You've said that clearly. You've said it passionately. You've said it as a matter of fact. Almost. I mean, it was just you went item by item, and I still am surprised by that. You know, I trained in the military to salute the president, so to say the president's un-American, yeah, it causes me angst. Do you still stand by that? You went a couple of weeks ago. You went item by item why he's not an American. He doesn't believe in American principles.
Yeah, at least there's no evidence that he does.
Yeah. So, Alex, I think, and I don't care about personality. You might like him or not like him, but I think you know the president, don't you? I think you're a supporter of President Trump's, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, do you take umbrage at that? All of a sudden, do you think Professor Tootle's off his rocker, or he's a communist, or he's just saying he's not an American? I mean, how do we even govern ourselves if we have such a disparate view? Maybe I'm not setting this up right, but I truly think you two truly disagree with each other. I mean, Professor Tootle doesn't hate Trump. He's a Christian, and I mean, the person he doesn't care about at all. He cares about the philosophy and the principles. And I assume you either like or don't like him, but who cares? The philosophy.
Well, like I'm not a fan of of his style and approach to, let's say politeness and civility. But when I look at fundamental principles, what does he actually stand for? What is he doing? They're very American principles. He stands for school choice. Obviously, that's something I believed in a long time. And it was about educational opportunity, which stands on the idea that all men are created equal, that you should be able to provide equal opportunity to people. It doesn't mean equal outcomes. It doesn't mean all people are, in fact, equal. They're created equal. They're not equal, thank God. And the biggest problem we have in this country, in my opinion, is that most kids are stuck in failing school systems. And the president has been a very strong supporter of school choice. He passed the first national school choice, or advocated for that, the ECCA bill, which provides vouchers to kids in every state in America for which governors would be willing to accept them. Unfortunately, Colorado is one of those states, thanks to Governor Polis. I can't think of anything more American, honestly, than advocacy for that particular policy.
Well, and Professor
I
Tootle is.
think, and I could go list, many more examples of that. I think it's highly American to for people, and it's foundational to the land of opportunity, that people advance on the basis of not their racial or ethnic identity, but on the quality of their character and the performance of merit. And DEI, for all of its excusably noble purposes for people advocating for it, runs counter to that and is enormously destructive to America. So how anybody can be called un-American for trying to get us back to an opportunity, merit-driven, if you do better, regardless of your color of your skin or your religion, you advance in job categories or in life. I have a hard time understanding why that's the case. And then when we look at foreign policy,
Hold on, let's stick on that for a second.
let me finish this, since Venezuela is of particular interest. We've seen numerous administrations over many years basically give away America's backyard. And, compared to, say, a Theodore Roosevelt, Trump is a lightweight. He's advocating very cleverly, I think, genius, what he's doing in Venezuela. We're not putting boots on the ground. We're not spending a bunch of money. And I'm very confident that we will have a much friendlier hemisphere within the next year or two, and hopefully a much friendlier Middle East in the next year or two. And you can complain all you want about whether that is, I don't know if that's, I think that's pro-American, but it certainly is going to be effective.
Okay, Professor, you have said very similar things on education about how entirely if we want to fix.
Well, let me short circuit this whole thing by just saying, if all President Trump did was the stuff that Alex Cranberg just described, I would be a Trump supporter. Like,
whether you can't say that
none of that stuff is the stuff that I have a problem with.
You can't say he's completely un-American. Then he's got a tapestry of things, and I think probably what you object to most is his trying to embrace as much executive power as possible. But unlike those who think that this is going to reach some constitutional crisis, I think what he's doing is he's pushing the envelope of what he can do, and he's getting that cut back, even with a mostly Republican, with a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, maybe because of a conservative majority in the Supreme Court.
Okay, let me help here. Professor Tootle, you stipulated that you agree with Alex on education and Venezuela. That may not be entirely true, but we don't need to take a lot of time on those two issues. So, why do you think the president is un American that it trumps specific issues?
Well, believe it or not, this is something that, if anything, I used to have in common with many of the people who are involved in the nationalist conservative movement is how seriously I take the idea of culture. That in Federalist One, we're here to decide the important question of whether or not human beings can govern themselves by reflection and choice, or if we are forever destined to depend on our political constitutions on accident and force and arbitrary power. And because of that, the cultural elements that I'm trying to preserve are things like courage and honor and humility and integrity and justice and moderation and prudence and respect and responsibility. And the things that the founders considered to be vices were cowardice, dishonor, hubris, self-deception, injustice, immoderation, extremism, imprudence, contempt, and irresponsibility. Those I'm taking those from that textbook that the Bill of Rights Institute has for junior high kids. And if you look at the virtues and vices of what it means to be an American, Donald Trump has none of the virtues and he has all of the vices. And that does
So
not
we're really getting into personality then, as opposed to
well,
substance.
I think that in this case that I am talking about principles, and it's entirely appropriate to say that the founders did have principles. They did have a specific culture.
But aren't all those virtues and vices that you enumerated ones that are not specifically American in nature, but really human? I mean, I can't imagine that any of those principles wouldn't also be embraced in Buddhism and Hinduism and very many cultures around there. They're not specifically American.
Certainly, but we have we're
Maybe
applying.
a Protestant work ethic that might be a little bit more of a Americanish kind of a thing, but nobody complains about him being lazy.
But differences of uh, between culture are not are often not this person entirely lacks this thing. It's a matter of a particular, sometimes pluralism is described like a bundle of sticks. And some of these sticks are taller and some of them are shorter. And that's what makes a culture unique. And in particular, the United States emphasizing those particular virtues and and hoping to avoid those particular vices are the product of a specific historical and cultural experience in the United States. I feel like I'm making the nationalist conservative argument here for the importance of the common law and Western tradition as it played out, but not the entire Western tradition. The Western tradition as it was known by a very specific group of people within the Western Hemisphere at a very specific time. As I always point out to my students, the British had 60 colonies and only 13 of them rebelled. So that means that it wasn't even specifically English. And after these colonies rebelled, a lot of the people who lived in them left. So this was a very specific group of beliefs that founded the United States of America, and it was very unique historically.
I think we ought to go back a little bit to the um, easy to get distracted by Trump and who he is and what he represents and what his virtues and his vices are, and compared to other people who probably are dishonest in less obvious ways. But um, I think that there's a fundamental conflict that people don't necessarily appreciate or recognize between the ethos of the Constitution and that of the Declaration of Independence. And it's worthy to go back to that because we as Americans tend to think about both those documents as each and equally uh, uh, foundational, and we tend to defer to the importance of both without necessarily having a lot of thought about what are the distinctions between the two from a philosophical point of view. I think when part of what happened to America, this idea that we need to kind of export a universalist idea abroad has got us trying to interfere with a lot of other countries, wanting to make them into images of ourselves. And where does that motive come from? And we're not really an imperialist nation, particularly. I mean, we have been a little bit 54-year fight in our own continent, maybe a little bit of what Teddy Roosevelt did, um, but we became kind of a culturally imperialist nation in some ways. And I think it stems from this idea that of universal human rights that that we all need to follow. If we tend to look at everybody in the world as being imbued in the same way that we are with these universal natural rights, that is the kind of Enlightenment John Locke attitude. That's a that can lead to kind of an unrestrained understanding of what our responsibilities are and why we why we maybe need to show some restraint as a nation.
And Alex, you're not talking about a relationship with Western Europe. You're talking about China and Russia and Iran
No,
and Saudi Arabia, and you're
But I
talking.
think you really need to listen to what he's saying. What Alex is saying is really important.
Okay.
And this is why I think it's worthwhile to talk to Alex. He's a smart guy. He's thought about this, and if I might be, and I'd say just you're just a little bit off. There's just a little
I'm
tiny
delighted
thing.
I'm only a little bit
Yeah,
off.
Well,
but
we're all a little off, right?
yeah, but you're definitely on the right track, and or I would just say, fine, we disagree. But Abraham Lincoln did think about this, and he described two things that I think answer your charge. First, do we have a universalist ideal? And the answer is yes. Abraham Lincoln said, in a famous letter to Horace Greeley, I intend no modification of my oft expressed belief that all men everywhere should be free. So, and Abraham Lincoln also thought about the relationship between the Declaration and the Constitution. He said that the Declaration of Independence was the apple of gold, the valuable thing, and that the Constitution is the picture of silver or the display case for the ideals of the Declaration. But he was always clear, as was the Republican Party. And this is why I say I am a conservative Republican and a conservative American, because I'm trying to preserve the ideals of the United States of America as expressed by the founders and understood by Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln said, and it wasn't just him. He was not the only one who understood this. Look at the foreign policy of the Lincoln administration, the Grant administration, the Hayes administration, the Garfield administration, even up through the McKinley administration. The reason why we get this stuff so messed up is because of the legacy of the hated Woodrow Wilson. But all of those Republican conservatives understood that John Quincy Adams was essentially right, that Alexander Hamilton and George Washington were essentially right. And that is, we cannot, in the words of Lincoln, confer such a boon. Meaning, when we are making foreign policy decisions, the pre-Wilsonian ideal in American foreign policy was that in order to act, the United States had to act out of both ideals and interests. And both of those things were necessary but not sufficient for action. So if the United States, if some country on the other side of the world was declaring its independence and we had no interest there, we'd say, good luck. We hope that, and this is what John Quincy Adams literally did say about the Latin American republics. We wish them well, but habits of hierarchy, both military and ecclesiastical, are stamped upon their characters. So we might not see actual functioning democracies in Latin America for 150 years, which is about how long it took. We don't get the first multinational or multi-party elections in Mexico until the 1990s. So,
Although I think that really ended up changing in the last 10 or 15 years, and the
Oh,
EU is turbocharged that further.
yeah.
But I think what we can also, so when our interests collide with these universalist principles, it's the universalist principles that took that took precedence. So we would fly the we destroyed our relationship with the country of Hungary, for example, during the Biden administration because um, we were upset at them for their stance on
Yeah.
LGBTQ.
And I was just saying there
That
is
kind
this
of
other, yeah, but there's this,
universalism that's frustrating. But I don't think we have to look necessarily just to foreign relations, but just look to the progressive expansion of rights in the United States, untethered from tradition,
well, I
that
guess,
has occurred over the last 10 or 15 years. And if you only looked at the Declaration, you would say, well, this is all about the pursuit of happiness, and the universal rights of man get endlessly expanded and relitigated to rights to um, rights to low cost housing, rights
yeah,
to education, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden, what does this really even mean?
right. But I would say that we don't need to be like them. That our constitutional structure of understanding that what the national government is there to do primarily is protect your negative liberties. That is your right to be left alone. And that if you would like to exercise your positive liberties, that it's something that should be done as close to the problem as possible. That's the old Republican position, that you want the level of government closest to the problem, solving the problem. And again, we don't need new ideas. The old ones work just fine. These are things that were outlined by Dwight Eisenhower and Calvin Coolidge and Abraham Lincoln. And I just don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just need to, um, I don't know, rediscover find out where the bathtub is again. I don't know, maybe that metaphor. I'm torturing my metaphor.
I think that's probably a good way of describing why the country is where it is right now, because it's a reaction to
Yes.
a things that just went out of way off to the left in the last decade or so. And so somebody comes up and says, "I got to restore the balance," and it looks like it's outlandish, but it actually is just a return, not completely, because nobody ever wants to be exactly the way we were 10 or 20 or 50 years ago, of course, but a desire to return to a little bit more rooted tradition.
All right, gentlemen. I really do want to get to Q&A. It's been part of our tradition. One seed planting with you both, and I don't think we're going to get here today. My umbrage with where we are in society is we have to go back to the law. And if Congress has authorized something to happen, then great. Same authoritarian actions, same results, same policies, but it's got to be on who has the authority to do it. And sometimes, and mostly, it's Congress. Sometimes it's not even Congress. Sometimes it has to be with the states or to the people. And I think we're overreacting so much that we're throwing away the Constitution. And that bothers me to no end. So it's not over personality at all. It's we have to go back to the rule of law so that we can be free. I just throw that out. Maybe you can kind of incorporate that in a Q&A with somebody else. All right. Steve, Boston, you signed up just to see fireworks. Sorry not to give it to you. Steve, what is your question or comment to Alex Cranberg or Stephen Tootle?
Wow, not be put on the spot, right?
Yep.
Uh, I guess my biggest concern is, Stephen and Alex, is that just like John was referring to, and you guys referred to it as well, we're establishing a precedent of going down the wrong path, of violating the rule of law. It's okay when I agree with it with my party, but what happens when we flip the script and it goes the other way? Are we going to get into this seesaw activity over the next 10 to 15 years? That's what I'm really trying to avoid right now is where do we abdicate that decision making, or can we put a cork in it now and stop it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really, really critical question, because the biggest concern I have is what started out as prosecutorial abuse under the Biden administration has turned into prosecutorial abuse under the current administration. And I think that one of the places where government, overweening government power is most vigorously expressed is in the power is given for criminal prosecution.
To take away your freedom
Yeah.
and put you in jail. Yep.
And
Right.
because you can't, nobody can afford to defend themselves against the unlimited legal budget of the U.S. government. And we saw Trump clearly being prosecuted in a politically motivated ways. And some of these judgments against him wouldn't have been judgments against any other people. The way he was treated in court was abysmal. I won't get into January 6th because that's a whole other debate, but I think we saw there's a long history of prosecutorial abuse in America. It didn't start with the Biden administration. My friend Frank Quattrone started the Quattrone Center. I think it was at UCLA to try to study and militate against this. But there's no question that under the current administration, there's a desire to try to even the score and a belief that there was abuses made that need to be held accountable in court of law. I would prefer to see that everybody kind of let bygones be bygones. I think it would have happened if there hadn't been such devious efforts to undermine the first Trump administration. Because I remember when Trump was in his first election, he went on about he was saying put Hillary in jail, but right after he got elected, he said, "Well, I think we ought to forget about all that." But it ended up then going. There was an opportunity; it could have gone in the right direction, and now it's going into a mutually reinforcing negative direction. And I think outside of this prosecutorial abuse question and politically motivated prosecutions, that the system's working itself out pretty good. I mean, people expect the rule of law to express itself instantly, and it doesn't. What do they say about the law moves slowly but finally, or something
Yeah.
like that?
The rule
And
of
we're
law
seeing that.
grinds, but it still grinds
Yeah,
slowly, right? Yeah.
but yeah, exactly, and it's happening. You can see that this is Supreme Court and this tariff decision.
Hmm.
Um, Trump has won most of his court cases, but certainly not all of them. And there hasn't been any of these feared constitutional crises. I think when we look at immigration law, I used to be, much more tolerant of abuses of the immigration law than I am now because I've realized it's got to be corrosive at some point. When small amounts of illegality and it was kind of tolerated and wink wink nod nod, it was kind of okay. But then when it got to be such large numbers and it was in your face, it started becoming, I think it went a bridge too far. And we do need to return to rule of law. And if that means that it makes life difficult for certain businesses, great. Well, then businesses put pressure on legislatures to reform the laws. We can go back to where we have reasonable immigration legislation.
Yeah. Professor Tootle, reaction to this?
Yeah, I don't. I guess I didn't agree in general. I'm a big fan of Ulysses S. Grant's inaugural, where he says, I'm going to enforce the law, and I know of no way of getting the repeal of a bad law so effective as its stringent execution. Meaning, if you guys pass this law, I'm going to enforce it. But within that, I do want to say, though, that prosecutors always have a ability to prioritize illegality, and
Mhm.
it would become, we all would recognize this is absurd if each of us were assigned a police officer who followed us to work every day and pulled us over if we went 1 mile over the speed limit, right? So we understand that actual prosecution of the law implies that you are going to prioritize who's bad and who's worse, and
Yeah,
and that's what most people would want. There's
yeah,
always going to be some play in the joints, and that's why, again, I'm getting back to, I feel like I'm making the nationalist culture, that culture is so important. that you have to have a culture of prosecutors who are truly standing for the American for justice as it's understood by the American people and deciding who and how to prosecute crime and not pursuing a political agenda.
Okay, Hope is signing off, so we don't have to go to her. Bart, you probably don't get the last question, but it's your opportunity to jump in. Here's our resident legal beagle, Alex. He wrote the state of laws in Colorado for 40 years for the state legislature. Bart, give us some wisdom from a legal perspective,
I
or
don't know
ask
if
a
I,
question.
I don't know how wise I am today. Alex and Stephen, I'm curious as to your initial feelings, because that's kind of about all you can do about the Supreme Court's tariff decision since it did come down today. I'm just curious.
Well, I guess my first one is that I was right, but I won't say anything else until I read it because, like everything, we on this show we try to emphasize. Remember, the Supreme Court answers questions, and until I see how they answered the question, I'm not going to say how I agree with it or not. I'm sorry. I just saw the headline, so I can't speak to it beyond that.
Yeah.
And
Alex?
I'm not in a position, I'm not being a lawyer to agree or disagree. I just observe that the process went, worked as it probably should. And it's going to create a bit of a mess, probably, depending upon what lower courts say have to do with refunds of past tariffs. Um, I think that Trump has numerous other tools in his tool chest to reenact some of those tariffs and accomplish other some of his foreign policy objectives. I'd like to see. I think it's impractical for Congress to negotiate trade deals kind of on the fly, country by country. But then Congress needs to be able to provide more discretion to the president than it has if we're going to use those as a tool.
I guess I would just add to that, though, that Congress is infamous for writing such broad legislation that huge regulatory agencies of the executive drive trucks through it, drive whole cities through it. So, I mean, of course, Congress can set the parameters for what kind of tariffs can be done and what kind of situations. Usually, it's just way too broad. And then in this instance, the president exceeded even that. So, yes, he'll be able to implement some other tariffs, and that's the way it should be. So I concur that the process is slow and burdensome. It looks like Kavanaugh would have been a yes as well, except he just didn't know how to refund everything and thought this was going to be a mess for a while. And it will be, but not a good way to run a country. Okay. Did Bart follow up on that?
No. Thanks for your guys' impressions. That was great.
Okay. Steve, you get one more bite at the apple before we close here. Alex is leaving in 4.5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, this is my first introduction to this kind of environment, so I appreciate the conversation, which I really do. I'm learning as I go along here, so I don't have another question, John.
Okay,
It's been
cool. Sorry.
really good to understand. What's
Okay,
that?
cool. So, Professor, I get to ask the last question for you. I am surprised that you weren't more adamant about the principles of the Declaration with Alex, because for 5 years you've just been adamant that all men are created equal, and other themes throughout the Declaration that are just as absolutely quintessential mandates for being an American citizen. Alex has said, it's got some stuff in there and it's different than the Constitution. And yeah, and so you let him off the hook entirely. And Alex, you get to defend yourself. I'm just really shocked that you just didn't go for the jugular against Alex, because you've been going to the jugular against me for 5 years because I used to speak what Alex did. Anyway, Professor.
I mean, I don't know. It didn't sound like he disagreed. Maybe I am, but I would guess I'd throw it back to Alex. What do you think I should go for your jugular? What do you think we disagree about exactly? Maybe I'm reading too much into.
No, I
Or
can articulate Alex's position. So Alex,
okay,
correct me.
but gets to speak for himself since
All right, fair enough. Alex.
Ah, well, look, there's obviously a lot that I love about the Declaration of Independence. I have this thing sitting on my wall right here, but I I'm suspicious of universalist proclamations as opposed to particularist ones. And I think that should be interpreting uh, the Declaration in the context of our traditions and history and culture, as who we are as a nation says a lot about what that really means. But I feel more comfortable embracing the Constitution because it directly um, attaches to my biggest concern about government and political philosophy, which is a tendency of governments to go off on a an absolutist or extreme tangent, and it addresses this great issue of factions that the founders were most concerned about. You could take the beautiful words of the Declaration and drive a truck through them, to use your concern about the kind of laws that the Constitution passes, that the Congress passes. So I'm just much more attached to the Constitution for what it's allowed America to retain and preserve.
Professor Tootle, you have 1 minute to respond, and then
Yep.
Alex is going to sign off. We'll stay
Okay.
on.
It's just simply this. The relationship is not that they are co-equal documents. They both serve a different function. That
Mhm.
that the Declaration cannot be, or I'm sorry, let me put it this way. I'll put it exactly the way Lincoln put it. You cannot interpret the Constitution in such a way so that it destroys the Declaration. That if you want to know what the Constitution means, you look at the Declaration. That the words themselves, that in all things where we're trying to actually put the Constitution into practice, there's a lot of flexibility there. But what you can't do is interpret the Constitution in a way so that it destroys the Declaration. And that was an important principle to get straight on the eve of the Civil War. And it's always an important principle to understand because essentially there were people who were arguing at the time that you can interpret the Constitution in such a way that would destroy the United States of America. And Lincoln was saying that would be absurd.
Yep. Alex, I know you have to sign off, but do you have a goodbye comment?
No, I think we've each expressed ourselves as best we can, and I think I would just say that as I've tried to study and learn more about the history of those two documents, I've understood them more than I used to as being not necessarily harmonious. And they're certainly not mutually destructive because they have been coexisting for all these 250 years. But they do come from different parts of the different thought traditions of the founding fathers, between Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration on one hand, and and Madison and Adams and some of the others in the Constitution. And the Constitution was more thoroughly thought through and debated, and the Declaration was a little bit more of the moment. But they don't come from exactly the same place in America. Professor Tootle, you're much
I
more
guess, yeah, I disagree with that part.
15 seconds, Professor.
The
You're gonna sign off.
Declaration was the result of 150 years of conversation, and Thomas Jefferson himself said that the Declaration represented the common sense of the subject, meant in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. And he said he was basically said any one of us would have written exactly the same thing. I was just chosen to write this because I was a good writer and I could do it quickly. But everything that's in the Declaration was already present in all of the state constitutions and all of the state charters. And he was saying that all of its authority rests in its ability to harmonize things that Americans already believed. And that's why the American Revolution was a conservative revolution. It was a revolution to preserve rights they thought they already had. So
Lovely.
even though it was written quickly, It was written over 150 years.
Lovely. Alex, you got to go,
I'll
right?
refer to your, yes, thank you. Great talking to you guys.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thanks.
it.
Pleasure to see
Thanks.
you
We
again.
got to do this again in another.
Oh God, a third time, Alex.
Well, I mean, I like Alex, and he's
I
just
know. Alex, while you're making money, defend America's interests, and I know you are. You've got a great history of philanthropy as part of your culture of business. Thank you. Protect America. It's worth it.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right, Professor Tootle.
yeah.
Alex is logging off. If he can figure out how to do that, okay, he did. We can either declare the show being over right now, or we can have a reflection or two. What's your preference?
Well, I would be open to answering some more questions if you have them or a conversation. The only thing I would say is that I would prefer not to say anything bad about Alex since he's
Oh yeah, no. I
uh,
just no. Alex is worthy of emulation. There's no.
yeah.
We don't need.
So, with that being said, I'm fine. What did you think about the conversation? Did it go the way you thought?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are both really smart, so it's fun anytime you get to sit around with smart people talking about the founding of our country and what we mean. I mean, this is like a political science student's dream, and I'm 45 years out of political science. So yeah, this is great. Hey, John, what'd you do with your political science degree? Well, 45 years later, I interviewed a PhD in history and one of the country's best business people. I mean, this is
But
great.
do you think? I hope it didn't sound too insulting when I said you're so close to getting it right. That
Yeah, yeah.
I do feel like there are these little things, and he just gets one. I mean, here I hope this doesn't sound
Well,
bad,
no,
but
you don't need to say it. Let me
thing
say it.
about the Declaration where having the wrong assumption about it leads you to some, I would say, incorrect uh, uh, further thoughts, and
Well,
that
so let me say it in this way, Professor, because you can continue to educate me. As I told you 3 months ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago, and 3 months ago, my whole life I have said what Alex said today. I mean, as a constitutional conservative, as I told you, word for word, I said, Professor, the Declaration of Independence is a declaration of war. It's a long litany of grievances against the king, and I've said very similar things to Alex,
yeah.
and you said, "Pause, John. You're wrong." And you took me through Lincoln. You took me through the principles of our founding and the culture of America, and you're swaying me. You're going, God, for 45 years I've been wrong on a subject, right? That we really have to value all men are created equal, and all are created equal now with both intent and amendments. And so I've had to do some, deep thinking on this. It's kind of rude to live your life in a lie, not a lie, but ignorant or whatever, And so, I don't think anyone's going to be able to sway me off. But the reason this is important, Professor, is with just a couple of differences. If I would have been involved in heritage rather than AEI, or if I would have married a different woman besides Meredith and married an arch conservative woman, if I would have been more at more gun shows and shooting ranges, the semi militia ones rather than regular gun ranges, I'd probably be a very aggressive, hardcore, Trumpy conservative kind of guy. And so, I realized that about myself, that the same value, not the personality stuff. Boy Scouts and church and soccer team, those all taught me to be kind and generous and teamwork. So the personality is just abhorrent to me, the character things. But as far as philosophy, heck, I'm an army guy. I like might makes right. The winner to the victor goes the spoils. The history is won by written by those who win. I mean, that's army stuff. Hooah, And so I see that in myself, that I can appreciate violence, or at some point, a cop needs to be there to protect you from the slime bag. The psychopathic killer, the cop needs to be there. Eventually, we do need an army that is real ruthless at fighting fascism. And so I get that element of the Republican Party. I just think if it's not done by the rules, then everything is chaos. It is only might makes right. And I don't know if we got to that today, because I think Alex is a might makes right guy. I think he goes, nope, we won, we're winning, and we're going to do whatever the hell we want. And Trump's good.
Well, we've talked about, and we had Hiram Lewis on here. I don't believe in the political spectrum,
I know.
and
Uh,
but I do believe that in Federalist One, and the graph that I draw for my students is I draw a circle, and inside that circle I write reflection and choice, and then outside that circle I write accident and force.
yeah.
Uh, and that's the one of the few times in American history where we really see a binary, a clear dividing line of what's inside the American tradition and what's outside the American tradition. And we're here to decide if human beings can be governed by reflection and choice, or whether we are forever destined to depend on nothing more than accident and force. And I'll recommend two funny things on YouTube that I showed in my classes. One is a clip of some British comedy sketch, and if you just look up on YouTube, "Are we the baddies?" and it's a bunch of Nazis sitting around, and they're like, "Wait, are we the bad guys?" And my study of history started, probably just to agree with your point about how your life will influence your beliefs, and who knows how you could have ended up. My grandparents and my great uncles all fought in World War II, and I began with the premise that the Nazis were the bad guys.
Yeah.
And whatever it was that they were doing was the wrong thing. And in studying what was wrong about utopian totalitarian thought, I just run scurrying away from any time I catch a whiff of that.
Well, so Professor, you're more sophisticated. I'm the same way. Mine is the Blues Brothers, though. And then when
Yeah.
they're at the bridge,
Illinois Nazis. Yeah.
yeah, I hate Illinois Nazis, and they run them off the bridge. And remember, I'm a Red Dawn guy. I'm older than you. The original Red Dawn that was located in Colorado. And
Hey,
anytime you fight the
I
Ruskies,
bet I've seen Red Dawn more often than you have.
I bet you have. But that's worth fighting. In fact, when Alex said I've got a 10 o'clock call, I'm dealing with Eastern Europe, and I don't want to name the country, but Eastern Europe, and I'm meeting with a important person. I've got to do this call. Cool. And I said, good. Make sure you fight the Ruskies while you're doing it. I mean, this is like inbred into me.
Yeah, but that just because I love the movie Red Dawn doesn't mean I agree with Patrick Swayze when he says because we live here.
Ah, that's a great point.
That when he says that what he's doing is right because we live here, like that's where I say, yeah, you're wrong.
Well,
That's
because he's not going by a fundamental principle.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Steve, now you get to jump in again. And then Jake,
Yeah.
if you have anything, you're welcome to jump in. All right, he's okay. Steve, you want to jump in again? This is how Professor Tootle and I have engaged for 5 years, for 150 shows.
It's
Guys,
very nice. It's very nice to meet you. Yeah, I think, John, what I was really looking for today was the core principles that Alex was talking about, and what America stands for, those basic principles. So we really, really kind of didn't get down to those core principles, right? And how those are being violated today. And it's not Alex, it's not Steven, it's just that
it could be a
whole,
bad facilitator because I concur with that statement. I wish we would have had more conversation on that. Yeah.
and it was all good. But yeah, I
Right.
think I'm a big principle over party guy, right? And that's John, that's how we connected from that
Yeah.
perspective. And I think, the principles that we stand for are being bastardized into law or violation of law, or just
Yeah.
completely ignored.
I'm really glad I asked. I'm glad for your answer. Professor Tootle, do you have a response? Do you agree with Steve that I screwed up by not getting you guys to talk about those?
I don't think so. I think that these are just complicated issues and it takes a long time to get to the heart of the matter. So
Mhm.
I don't think that you could have done more
Yeah.
in an hour. Especially
Well,
when
but
you be respectful and let people have their say.
yeah, they gotta articulate their thoughts. But help me out on this. If somebody tunes into the show 5 years from now and they watch the whole thing and they get to this stage, you're going to urge them to look at the following kind of essays or books or people, or how do
Well,
they
I would
think
say
through Steve?
a couple of short things. First, I would say, just Google Lincoln Apple of Gold, fragment on Constitution and Union, because that's where Lincoln really explains what the relationship is between the Declaration and the Constitution. And it's reiterated
Really a fragment.
it's,
this long.
Yeah, it's a paragraph, right? It's very short.
Yeah.
And then I would say look up Calvin Coolidge's speech on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that speech. Because in that speech, he really outlines what my criticism of the current era is. And Alex even said, if the essentially people are becoming reactionaries because they feel like they have to be. But
And by the way, it's not just Alex. Most of my Trump supporting friends are exactly that way. They are pissed. They think
right, yeah.
they've got to do what they're doing because the left has just gone overboard. They've gone
But
insane.
you need to understand that that's whatever that is, it's not conservatism. And that
Right.
Calvin Coolidge speech explains that there is no progress beyond the ideals that are enshrined in the Declaration. That he says, if all men are created equal, that is final. If they're endowed with by their Creator with inalienable rights, that is final. If just governments come from the consent of the governed, that is final. No progress can be made beyond these propositions. And anyone who wishes to proceed historically is only, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it memorized, but can only go backward. If you're not advocating for those things, you're not an advocate for progress. You are a reactionary. And what we're supposed to be as conservatives are people who are committed to making progress towards these goals that we will never achieve, right? That
We're flawed humans.
yeah, we're a bunch of flawed humans. So we just have to say we're going to try and have consent of the governed, rights of the individual, and inalienable rights and equality, and we're going to fail, and we're going to try and figure it out, and we're going to be in peace. And next year, we're going to peacefully come back and try to do a little bit better. And people always want there to be an answer, but wanting there to be an answer always results in totalitarianism. That wanting there to be a solution. There is no solution because we're humans. So none of us are gods. None of us know everything. So we just have to commit ourselves to the peaceful process of working towards these goals that we know we will never achieve.
Okay, so Professor, I've got one big picture item I'd ask you to dream about, and you probably just have answers. You could probably just take 10 minutes and tell me, but I think we should do a show or two on it. I can't quite articulate it. It's in my head floating around, but I can't.
Let it flow. I'll see if I can tease it out of you.
There's an element of my former party and your current party, Republican, that truly does appreciate force. They want to. I mean, Trump just says it, beat that guy up, or I'll defend you in jail. I mean, he says it. It's not imaginary. And there's a lot of people that I know in real life. They're the army guys. They're the street fighters. They're the tough guys. They're the beer drinkers in bars. I mean, there's a lot of tough guys out there. I know a lot of them, and I like most of them. And they want to not have that reflection and choice. They want to kind of punch somebody. And for some reason, it's not just locally. It's not an immigration policy, but they kind of like it when illegal immigrant is thrown to the ground and stuck a knee in the neck and push a protester out because she's just some crazy liberal. And yeah, some people get killed. He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have tried to pick up that woman, and he was carrying a gun too. He definitely should have been killed. They like that. They don't. It's not. That's a virtue, not a vice. And that has permeated the Republican Party. I know it's always been a part of us. But it's permeated and so let me give one more. You said let it flow. I'm letting it flow. It's not just an individual immigration or pardons or January 6th or suing law firms or universities or, they use it in also. I'm not just talking fists. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to force you to give me part of your company. Federal government, give me part of your company. It manifests itself in all sorts of ways. And in foreign policy, I actually get this a little bit. The United States has been forcing other countries when we give them USAID dollars, or we put a military post there, or we give them some trade agreement, and you can go on and on and on with the power of the federal government. They say, yeah, we're going to do this, but you got to respect women more than you're respecting women. You got to do that. And by the way, you're not supporting minorities. You got to change your policies, country. And even now, sorry, you got to do the gay thing. Really, you're hurting gays in your country, and we don't like that. And if you want to deal business with us, you better respect gays. And trans, sorry, man, we have trans soldiers or we have trans things, and this burden on companies that Alex represents. And I'm not speaking for him, but I've heard it a lot. They go, this is ridiculous to impose Americans' values on women, minorities, gays, trans, school prayer. I mean, you just go all through all the abortion, all the different social issues and say, we demand that you become more like America. And there's a certain element of Americans that go, this is crazy. We can't do contracts like this. We can't win. Yeah, other countries will get the contracts because they're saying, no, we don't have those values. They're not fundamental to the Declaration. And at least in our country, we don't want that. And that is a real element that they are pushing back hard on, really hard. It's not just the wokeness. It's because I've never really understood that, but it's those kind of things built up into real world stuff that's saying enough's enough. We can't survive as a country anymore. It's a suicide pact. If we're going to demand everybody be like us, which is a mess, this pluralistic cultural mess where everybody gets to do what they want, we're going to lose. We're going to fail as a country. We need to go back to our values. And anyway, I know I've thrown a bunch of different crap in there, but that's really what this fight is about between Trumpies and everybody and the liberals on the other side, and then you and me in the middle, and maybe Steve too. We're trying to have some sense to this madness. Anyway, is that worth the show, or can you just say, John, you're a madman?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can answer the first part pretty quickly, and that is that it's not a Republican thing, it's a human thing. That everybody wants to reward friends and punish enemies.
No, they don't. I don't want to do that.
Sure. You said yourself, there's a certain sense of justice that people have that they're prone to be sympathetic to, even when it is rough justice. And it's just the kinds of violence forgiven by the current Republican and current Democratic Party just happen to be different. So there are many people who were fine with harassment of Jews on college campuses, or shouting down, or interrupting classrooms, or occupying spaces. I mean, going back to the anti-globalist protests of the late 1990s and 2000s, where people were engaged in violent takeovers of buildings. And the fact that, and I would even say they're in some ways more tolerant of violence. If you look at the Weather Underground, the fact that they're all professors and not in prison, it means that the liberal institutions are far more tolerant of terrorist violence when it's coming from a different direction. But that does not excuse terrorist violence in any form. But why are we like that? Because it's a human trait. It's something you have to teach people to not be like that. That's part of the long-term process of education, is to teach people, yes, I know that is a feeling that you have, but what you should value is, Madison was clear about this, that we're not here to take your feelings and translate them into actions. We're here to take your feelings and let them pass and force you into reflection, which means I'm thinking about this thing after it happened. Passions have already cooled. And choice, meaning you have to not just make an argument that appeals to you. You have to convince people who don't agree with you to change their minds. And until you do that, you don't get what you want. And you're not allowed to use violence in order to do that. Yeah. So that's a very human trait that people have. As to the second part, I don't know. Yeah, we probably need a separate show on it.
Well, I'll listen to my ranting, my spoilage of words out in the salad, and see if I can make it a little more cohesive for you. Steve, you get the second to last bite at the apple. You have any other further comments? You had a critique, which I liked, and Professor Tootle explained, which I accept. Any other thoughts or comments today?
No, I'm good. I'm good for the day. So thanks, John.
Okay, very much appreciate you joining us. You're a smart
Thank you.
guy, and whenever smart people express an interest, especially when you said you just wanted to see fireworks between Tootle and Cranberg, I don't think we gave it to you, but it's fun to show up for.
Didn't happen. So I guess
Well,
that's good.
there's people like going to UFC fights and WWE, so they like that. So I get it. Sorry to not give you the car crash.
No, I like those intellectual sparks, right? That's where you'd like you said, you have this violence, right? And resorting to violence and punching. Yeah, anyone can punch anybody in the face. That's fine, right? But it's this intellectual punching that we kind of need to go through and have these conversations, right? Right makes right, and that's kind of the biggest things that I've seen. That I'm really concerned about, right? Is I guess you would say, the government coming through and using that might versus right on its own populace. And so that's where I was trying to see, where is that going to stand out?
There's a great letter of Theodore Roosevelt to Lincoln Steffens, who's a socialist, and he was talking about Senators La Follette and Tillman. And he said, some people listen to them and get some ideas that are right, and sometimes people listen to them and get ideas that are wrong. But for the most part, they get no ideas at all. And they get the same sort of pleasurable excitement they would get at the sight of a spotted circus horse
Oh God,
performing a trick.
you're depressing me, Professor. That's not a quote that inspires me.
Well, it should make us feel good that was from like 1906. And he said they're becoming very popular at Chautauquas, but neither of them are actually making any progress. And then, I mean, maybe I'll leave you with this. This is some good advice. He said, I care about the man who takes the next step, not the one who theorizes about the 200th step.
I love that quote. Who's that from?
Theodore Roosevelt.
Roosevelt. Huh. Lovely. So, isn't he one of your former students?
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, good. Jake, our regulator.
Yeah. High school history
Eye in the
professor.
sky.
Professor, I'm a teacher.
Teacher. Oh yeah. Well, a protege of Tootle. You too could get a PhD.
No.
Gosh.
Tootle told me not to.
Okay. Fair enough. You're welcome. All right. Hey, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Great to see you two together. Yeah.
We're gonna go have breakfast.
All right.
Cheers.
All right. Have a great
Bye.
day, gentlemen.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Did it stop somehow? I bet it didn't.